Hello, everybody. It is 2019, Roth, but as everyone's been asking, when is your top 10 list of 2018 coming out? It's coming out today, and it's because even at the end of the year, there was so much coming out. There was so much we wanted to catch up with. Neither one of us even made it all the way, but we wanted to watch everything we possibly could, and there were so many good movies this year.
There were a number of good movies this year, and we'll be talking about that a lot. Mentioned right now, there's a couple I didn't see. Burning, Mariah may have made it onto my list, but we're going to talk about some fantastic films that did come out this year that we were able to see. Those I wasn't able to get my hands on, frankly. Look forward to that, and we're going to start with talking about Black Panther. So we're not starting with our number one.
No, or our number 10 even.
Or our number 10 even. We're going to start with a film that has been very heavily in the conversation, and rightfully so this year, as one of the most significant and impactful, I think, blockbuster films of our time.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to kick off with some honorable mentions, and for both of us, Black Panther is a film that's on both of our lists, and quite frankly, it's been on so many year-end lists, I think a lot of people might have expected that it was going to be on either one of ours. And like I said, 2018, there were so many great movies. Some of these names I think you're going to recognize, some of them you probably won't recognize, but it's not a knock on Black Panther that it's not on either of our lists. I think it's just a testament to the fact that so many great movies came out in 2018. I saw something like 160-something of them. I think I liked over half of them, and there were about 40, honestly, that I was looking at the end of the year. I could have swapped some of those out for a lot of these that are on the list. It's just a really good year for movies, 2018.
It sure is, and I will say this, echoing what you just said, because there were a couple of we gotta have that. We really just gotta have that on our list for me and Dan, that we will both have the same film. But we decided to be a little bit crafty, and because there are about 25 to 30 that landed on my top 10 list, we decided to change some of them.
We traded off a little bit.
We traded off a little bit. Dan could take one on his list, but really it also would have been on mine. I could take one that also really would have been on Dan's. And that way we get to talk about as many of these great films as we can. And to Dan's point, any one of our honorable mentions at another day might have landed in that top 10. So that just sets up the framework for our discussion. And that said, there's probably about 15 to 20 films I loved this year that I loved equally and for different reasons, just like you do your children. But hey, the structure of our world is you got to have a list. So here we go. We did it. My honorable mentions, besides Black Panther, are Minding the Gap, which is a documentary that is on the short list for an Academy Award that you can watch on Hulu right now. This is basically the documentary version of Mid-90s by Jonah Hill, and it's fantastic. Can't recommend it enough. There's another film called Shoplifters that is on the short list for the Best Foreign Film for Academy Awards. Easily, painstakingly, this really was on my top 10, but we wanted to sort of have a balanced take. We'll talk about that in a bit. So I made room for a different film, but this film is fantastic. It's a beautiful slice of life film. I cannot recommend it enough. The Sisters Brothers. We slept on that Western film.
I missed it. That's one that was on my list that I didn't get to see.
We really slept on this film as a united front, and it was in theaters. A lot of people missed it. This is some great acting, a big twist on the Western, beautiful filmmaking. Check it out. 8th Grade, easily one of my favorite films of the year. This is a great debut film that is one of the best coming of age films, and Spencer has talked about this before, that has one of the most harrowing scenes of the year. The Favorite, heavily in contention, probably for Oscar. Big at the BAFTAs, most nominated film. You know it, you love it. A Quiet Place came out much earlier in the year, genre film that was largely going to be ignored this year, probably in awards contention because it is such a packed field. But this is a beautifully made film, beautifully
scored
acted.
a surprise, I believe, PGA nomination.
Surprise PGA, and well-deserved. This is a
really good
incredible
piece of
film.
filmmaking,
Love, Simon. This is a rom-com that Dan brought to my attention. Thank you, Dan. It's one of my favorite rom-coms of the past 10 years.
It's really good.
It is so good. You got to check it out. Bad Times at the El Royale, a film that critics didn't love, audiences didn't love, but man, did I. I thought this was a beautiful piece of satire. Leave No Trace. This you can watch currently on Amazon. It is a very, very beautifully told tale of a father and a daughter, PTSD of war, and all that implies. Three Identical Strangers is a documentary this year. It was a huge year for documentary. We're going to talk about that in a bit. Thoroughbreds, which was another directorial debut that came out earlier in the year, that I highly recommend as a dark comedy that's sort of like crafted beautifully, just cinematically, and coming from a playwright. and Vice. If you see it for nothing but Christian Bale's performance, see it for that. Though I think there's a lot more to recommend that film. Dan, what are your honorable mentions?
I overlap with you on several of them, so I'm just going to try to get through them as quick as I can. But I agree with you on Bad Times at the El Royale. I really like that movie. There's a scene with Cynthia Erivo in that scene that is one of the best scenes that I saw in 2018. Mandy is a film that was such a crazy mind trip. Panos Cosmatos is a crazy person, and this was an acid trip. I felt like I'd had every drug imaginable poured directly into my eyeballs.
Oh, Mandy.
One of the most unique theatrical experiences. Love, Simon was one that was a honorable mention for me. I really, really like that movie. First Man from Damien Chazelle. Not everybody connected to the portrayal of Neil Armstrong in that film. I thought it was a really impressive cinematic achievement. The craft of that film really impressed me, and I also love the performances. I liked the approach. I thought it was really good. Roma is on my list. I reviewed Roma. I think it is a stunningly made technical achievement. It didn't connect with me emotionally as it has with a lot of other people, but it's still, I couldn't not mention it just for the craft behind that film. It's really, really incredibly made movie. Thoroughbreds is on my list. Olivia Cooke and Anya Taylor-Joy, I thought, were fantastic in that movie. That's another earlier release movie that I think deserves a lot more love. The Wife with Glenn Close and Jonathan Pryce. Glenn Close now at the forefront of the best actress race at the Oscars, as she should be. She's phenomenal in that film. Jonathan Pryce is great in that film, and that film is great. And then Vice was also an honorable mention for me, not just for Christian Bale. He is fantastic. Amy Adams is great. Steve Carell is the one in that movie. He made Welcome to Marwen, and he made A Beautiful Boy, which I think were both big swing Oscar movies for him. My favorite of his performances was his performance in Vice. I thought he was great as Donald Rumsfeld in that film.
Well spotted. I forgot Mandy, which would have been on my list too. So there you go, folks. You're going to probably mention some movies that we would have had, but maybe forgot because heck.
I could do 10 or 20 more. I honestly could.
I honestly could too. And man, we're only human, so we just have to have a list, even though I fundamentally don't believe in them. But here we go.
Yeah. And this is not. I'm not saying these are best. I'm sure this will be called best, but I will say these are my 10 favorite movies of 2018.
I will say these are the ones that lingered with me and had the greatest impact on me this year. Period. So that's what it is. So let's talk about this. Paddington, and we've talked about this, art is subjective. That's what it is.
Yes, it is.
So I'm going to name my number 10. And here what I'm trying to do with this, Dan, is practice what I preach.
Sure.
So we talk a lot on the show about how awards often ignore, it's all best dramatic movie. It's not best movie because they ignore family films, they ignore comedies, they largely ignore genre films. So Paddington 2, I think, is well deserved on this list. This is directed by Paul King. It is obviously the follow-up to the brilliant and wonderful and perfectly constructed, I dare you to argue with me, Paddington. It stars Ben Whishaw as the voice of Paddington the Bear, with Hugh Bonneville, Sally Hawkins returning, along with Julie Walters, Jim Broadbent, Peter Capaldi. Hugh Grant has what should be an Oscar-nominated supporting role in this film. Of course, it won't be Oscar-nominated, but it should be. And here's the thing about Paddington and Paddington 2. First of all, I want to just credit the filmmakers for the original voice of Paddington was Colin Firth. Which I'm sure he did a fantastic job, but they listened to it and they felt it wasn't quite capturing the essence of that bear. And so they replaced it with Ben Whishaw, who I think is brilliant in this film, and absolutely perfect. It is warm, it is funny. There are lessons for both adults and children, and it's very, very difficult, I think, to do a follow-up to a movie like Paddington with a sequel, to have it further develop the characters and not just do a repeat of the previous film and what was successful about it, but actually extend their lives and their development in that world, and that is what Paddington 2 does. That is why it is my number 10. I think this is a beautiful family film that deserves a lot more recognition than it is currently getting.
Agreed. My number 10 is also Practice What You Preach. It was a pick that I put on here because for the exact same reason. I'm so tired of getting to the end of the year, and it seems like the only movies that are considered are the dramas that come out between September and December. So I picked a movie that not only came out earlier in the year, but is, gasp, a comedy. And my favorite comedy that I saw in 2018, Game Night. Game Night, it did pretty well at the box office, but it wasn't a runaway hit. This movie is hilarious. It stars Jason Bateman and Rachel McAdams as two hyper-competitive couple that are hosting a game night with Jason Bateman's brother, who's played by Kyle Chandler, and things just escalate out of control. This was the funniest movie that I saw in 2018, and I love the fact that it is a big studio comedy that actually looks like a movie. I don't know what happened, but sometime around 2008, it seems like all the studios got together and decided that the majority of their comedies would have to be flatly lit, look like 1990s sitcoms, so that they could roll 17 cameras and do 45 minutes of improv. They all look the same. They all sound the same. This actually looked like a movie. To me, it was a throwback to the comedies of the 80s that were good movies first and funny movies second. The cast, not only Rachel McAdams, the ones that I mentioned, Jason Bateman, Kyle Chandler, Jesse Plemons, hilarious in this movie.
By the way, is perfect in Vice.
Yes, also great in Vice. Jesse Plemons, hilarious in this movie. He should be up there with Hugh Grant, if you ask me, as far as being recognized for the performance. He absolutely steals every scene that he is in as their neighbor, who is just creepy as hell.
Yeah.
But by the end of it, you find the humanity underneath that. I just really love this movie. I like it a lot. I think you should watch it. I think it should be in the conversation with every other movie this year.
Agreed.
And when I'm looking at my 10 favorite movies of the year, I just felt like I've got to put my favorite comedy of the year on the list. So I picked Game Night. And by the way, if you are a fan of the DC universe, the directors of this film, John Francis Daley and Jonathan Goldstein, are currently attached to do the Flash movie.
Yeah.
Which I think is great news if you're a fan of that character, because I am certainly excited to see what they do next.
Bodes very well for The Flash. Also, if you're a fan of Freaks and Geeks, he finds his roots there.
Exactly.
John Francis Daley.
There you go.
The next, I loved that movie too. Easily could have been on my list. Some of yours absolutely were on my list until we decided to trade off, and we'll talk about those as well.
I think at one point we had like 8 out of 10 that were the same, and we're like, this should be an interesting video.
Yeah, let's switch it up a little bit. So Black Klansman for me, and we're about to get into the point where the numbering here is completely arbitrary. This could all switch up.
Except for number 1, you can shuffle my list, really.
You really could shuffle mine too, but I just want to talk about them. So Black Klansman is certainly on my list for this year. It's in contention, and it's in awards contention, rightfully so, directed by Spike Lee. Some people are calling it a return to form. I actually have liked a couple of his other films over the last few years, more than some critics did. This stars John David Washington as Detective Ron Stallworth. This is based on the real-life events of Detective Ron Stallworth's life. Adam Driver, Detective Philip Flip Zimmerman, Laura Harrier is in this film, and of course Topher Grace as David Duke. Now, here's what's so amazing about this film. Not only does it capture satire, which I think is actually one of the most difficult tones for any film or television show to really ride that line. So it's satirical, it's dramatic in moments. It is a commentary on the culture of the days, but also on now. So if you don't know the plot of the film, if you haven't seen it, Ron Stallworth starts a conversation on the phone pretending to be a KKK candidate with David Duke. And then he has a white detective who is actually Jewish go in and play him when they have to meet the KKK in person, and it's because they are basically investigating their activities and their intent toward violence or not. It's an incredibly tense film for obvious reasons. It sort of unpacks relationships between people, and Adam Driver's character goes through a journey where he has to see how part of the system he is or not, or should be or not, if the system is actually pretty racist as well against him. So it's a very challenging film in that sense. It's got an ending that brings it into our contemporary life that frankly floored me and left me in tears, but I think was appropriately done to remind you this is not in the past, this is very much in the present, all of these issues. And it's a film that I think when you look at the structure and Spike Lee's understanding of the use of the tool of cinemas, it takes basically Birth of a Nation and all of the cinematic techniques that it introduced to the world and that filmmakers continue to use and turns them on its head in this sequence that is cross-cutting a discussion about Birth of the Nation and its impact with real-world violent events. So it is gorgeously constructed. It is exactly methodically made by Spike Lee. It is at turns tragic and funny. and then tragic once again. It really makes you think. I cannot recommend this film enough for everyone to see.
That was one of our negotiated
We
films because Black
negotiated
Klansman
around
was
this.
right up there for me as well. But this is another film that it is a late year release, but it is one that was not only ignored by audiences, but largely by critics as well. This is a very divisive movie, but it's one that I really liked, and it's called Vox Lux.
I
It
love
stars
this movie.
Natalie Portman as a pop star named Celeste, and to me, this is a film that is about what fame does, not just to a person, but to the people around them. It is about the intoxicating effects of fame. It's about what having recognition foisted upon you can do to you and the ripple effect that that can have on your life. I think in an alternate universe, Celeste and Jackson Maine from A Star is Born would get together and be Hollywood's train wreck hot mess couple, because they both are certainly a different kind of messed up, these two different movies. But what I love about this movie is so often these kind of like portrait of an artist type films show you the art first, and you get to know who these people are as performers or as a painter or as a writer, and then you peel the layers away and you see what's underneath. And there are a lot of films that do that extraordinarily well. What I love about this film is that you see the ugliness first. You see everything bad, everything, and I think that's what turned a lot of people off about this film, is that for an hour and a half, all you see is Natalie Portman at her worst.
Yeah.
You see Celeste at her absolute bottom, at her most needy, at her most off-putting, at her most dismissive. And only at the end do you get to see why people love her.
Yeah.
And they choose to focus not only on why an audience loves her, but you loop back to the characters that you've seen her abuse and harass and push away for the entire movie, and you see them rediscover what it is about her that makes her so magnetic. And turning that formula on itself, I thought was a brilliant move by this movie. Again, this is a divisive film, but I love this movie. I love the portrait. I love this character. Natalie Portman is getting no recognition whatsoever.
She's getting maligned.
She's getting, this movie and her character and her performance are being actively maligned by a lot of people. I don't agree with that. I love this movie, and if this sounds like the kind of thing that you would enjoy, it's not an easy watch. It's certainly, it starts off brutal,
Yeah, it does.
and it doesn't get any less brutal. It is narrated by Willem Dafoe, which I found very soothing throughout.
Yeah.
I just love hearing Willem Dafoe talk. Sure. But if you want to roll the dice on something and really look at something, if A Star is Born is sort of the Hollywood studio version of Portrait of an Artist, I think Vox Lux is the rock star punk version of that. And I love this movie.
Yeah, it was funny that you said that because I forgot to mention A Star is Born in my honorable mentions. I think I like that a lot more than you. But a fascinating double feature for me would be Star is Born and Vox Lux, which, like you, we negotiated this one as well. I loved in a way that critics did not, and I really responded to the material because what I think it demonstrates, as to your point, is that these people are so dependent on Celeste, and the weight of that turns her into a monster. That's not the only thing that turns her into a monster.
Yeah.
Maybe it's other things that are explored in the film. But she falls apart, and they stitch her back together enough to send her out on stage to let the world fall in love again with her so that they can continue to live in this toxic dynamic. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
I also just want to do a quick correction. I used the term racism incorrectly. I meant bigotry.
Oh, okay.
And I want to say that that the performance by John David Washington deserves awards contention. Absolutely. Okay, moving on. Number 8. I cheated, Dan Murrell, and I'll tell you why. I did cheat a little bit. So there are 2 movies made by the same filmmaker, Morgan Neville. They're 2 documentaries this year. Won't You Be My Neighbor, which is a story of the... Boy, do we miss him and need him right now. Mr. Rogers, Mr. Fred Rogers himself. And They'll Love Me When I'm Dead, which is a documentary about the making of the final Orson Welles film that was released on Netflix, called The Other Side of the Wind. And this is why I am recommending these films, besides that they are in and of themselves just both fantastically made documentaries this year that are really gripping portraits of these 2 men. The reason I'm recommending them together is that because I think Morgan Neville has demonstrated an really remarkable talent and ability to step out of himself and really be a true documentarian, because each of these films feels like the man it's about. So when you watch Won't You Be My Neighbor, you will walk out of this film feeling optimistic, feeling hopeful, feeling that the world can be a better place, and with the inspiration to rise to your better self, which is what Fred Rogers wanted from us. You will walk out and leave They'll Love Me When I'm Dead feeling chaotic, inspired in a mad way, and I think a little cynical, and all of the things that embody Orson Welles. So I highly recommend that you watch They'll Love Me When I'm Dead and then followed by the film, but I highly recommend as well that you watch both these films and just watch what it takes to be a true documentary filmmaker, which is an art that is often under-recognized.
I haven't seen They'll Love Me When I'm Dead, or like You'll Love Me When I'm Dead, but Won't You Be My Neighbor brought me to one of the movies this year that brought me to tears. It's a beautiful documentary. My number 8 is a movie that there's certain films you get to the end of it and you realize that was the perfect version of what it was going for. Like it was it nailed exactly what it was trying to be. And that's how I felt when I got to the end of Revenge, which is a French film that was released here in the States this year. This is a brutal, down and dirty, just gritty, bloody, sandy, messy revenge movie. It reminds me a little bit of Mad Max Fury Road, and that Mad Max Fury Road is just about getting to where you gotta be. Through whatever you got to be there, and this is just about these men wronged this woman, and they got to get got, and it's about her getting them, and that's it. That's all it's about. I loved this movie. I really, really did. It's one of those where sometimes you get to a point in the movie and you're just like, they're just it's almost like an opera crescendoing or an orchestra crescendoing. You just are hoping that the movie is gonna snap to black at the exact time. And this movie, you get to the final shot, and in my mind, I'm like, if this cuts to black right now, this nailed it, and it just cut to black at the exact perfect second. Again, if you're squeamish, probably not the movie for you, but I like this movie a lot. Coralie Fargier, I'm sure I'm getting the pronunciation completely wrong, is the writer and director of this. She did a fantastic job with this film. And also Matilda Lutz, who plays the lead in this movie, is also great in this. If you're looking for just a almost grindhouse level revenge movie, Revenge is the movie for you.
So we did a ScreenJunkies show earlier this year with Hal Rodnick talking about the best movies of 2018 so far. And Revenge was very much on my list. I love that movie as well. That would be on my list as well this year for all of the reasons you illuminated and so many more. I will say that there is a moment in the film that you recognize that this is not about reality because it's an impossibility. And you have to give over to the fact that this is a wish fulfillment fantasy where something would have ended right there and the story would have been a very tragic, typical tale, but then it's heightened.
It keeps going.
And it keeps going, and it's a real revenge fantasy. Can't recommend it enough. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Dan, is my number 7.
Wow.
But again, this could have landed at number 1 in another day or another position.
Yeah.
I really love this film. This is Bob Perschetti, Peter Ramsey, Rodney Rothman directed. Obviously, Phil Lord and Rothman wrote the screenplay. It was produced by Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who we just adore. Shameik Moore as Miles Morales, Jake Johnson, Haley Seinfeld, Mahershala Ali. Look, we've talked about this movie quite a little bit. And the truth is, it can't be underscored enough how good it is. Because this is not just one of the best comic book movies of the year. This is not just one of the best, if not, let's say it, the best animated movie of the year. I haven't seen Mirai, I'm sorry. But it is also just frankly one of the most well-constructed films of the year. It absolutely understands visually the genre that it's in. It brings, we've talked a lot about movies that attempted to bring comic books to life, but this is the first film that truly and self-consciously does so. It is a visual experience. It uses every tool of cinema, but more importantly, it's a story that tells you what the story is several different times because they replay the story of Peter Parker over and over again, Spider-Man in the various forms over and over again, but yet they are still able to surprise you and capture you and find pathos in the story of Miles Morales. And most importantly, this is his story at the center, and all of these other pieces are supporting his growth and his development. It is just a gorgeous coming-of-age tale, a tale of heroism, and a tale of the birth of a Spider-Man. I love it. I can't say enough about this film. Visually, story structure, the acting, everything is done to perfection, and I do mean that. There is nothing I would change about this film. And it has amazing villains.
I agree with you. I'm a huge fan of Spider-Man in the Spider-Verse. I back you up 100% on everything you just said.
Well, thank you, sir. And we might hear about it again. But what's your number 7?
My number 7 is, I think this might be the most hit or miss genre of all time, which is risky, big swing sci-fi.
Oh, yep.
You can either do this really well or you can do this really badly, and most people don't even agree on whether you did it well or badly. There's usually even a divide there. But there was a big swing sci-fi movie that came out this year that I love, directed by Alex Garland, called Annihilation. Sadly, not released theatrically throughout most of the world. It was a Netflix release in a lot of other countries, but we got very lucky to have it on the screen here in the U.S. very, very briefly. I love this movie. I love the risks that it takes. I love the visual style of it. I love how Alex Garland is able to communicate the otherworldliness of this shimmer, of this realm that these scientists have entered. Natalie Portman obviously connected with me big time this year because she's in 2 of my top 10, playing a completely different character than she does in Vox Lux. It's not just the style. I love the fact that it is cryptic but not inaccessible. I think it is symbolic, but it's not completely opaque. It did not frustrate me. Sometimes there are big movies like this that I get very frustrated with because I don't mind looking for meaning, but I feel like sometimes there is no meaning to be found. It's just sort of being oblique for the sake of seeming very kind of profound. I didn't get that from this movie. I think that there are definitely some places where you can make up your own mind about things, but I think it was painted so well. And it also had one of my favorite scenes of the year, and maybe the most horrifying or up there in the top 2 or 3. The bear scene in this film was one of the theatrical moments from 2018 that I don't think I will ever forget. I love that moment. I love so much about this film, from the casting to the direction to the visual effects. And I hope that in the years to come that the preservationists and places that hold screenings around the country and around the world will let Annihilation be seen again on big screens everywhere, because I think you'll really dig it at home, but I think you'll really love it on a big screen.
So this was another one that was on both of our lists, and then we negotiated around because I couldn't agree with you more. I loved that film. Not everyone did, and that's okay. And I think one of the things that I loved the most about the telling of it and how clear it was that the issues that each of these women walked in to the shimmer with were all played out in their ultimate conclusions.
Yeah.
I thought in a really, really poetic but not overplayed way. I really, really love Annihilation for all the reasons you mentioned. Yep. My number 6 is a very, very understated film, in contrast to Annihilation. Very understated, as a matter of fact. It's called The Rider, and it actually had a festival run in 2017, but it had a small release in 2018. This film is really, really beautiful. It is a Western drama. It's written, produced, and directed by Chloe Zhao, and it stars Brady Jandreau, Lily Jandreau, Tim Jandreau, Lane Scott, and Cal Clifford. It was shot in South Dakota, and it's based on the real life of the film star Brady Jandreau. He plays a man named Brady, different last name. Same thing. His sister in the film is his real sister, and so forth like that. What's amazing about this film, these are all non-actors who she is able to elicit some of the most profound performances I've seen from this year, but it's probably largely because it's his real story. He's a rodeo rider who had a brain injury and is no longer able to ride, and then now must confront his entire identity as a result. This film left me shattered. I was just on the floor after watching it. It is so profound and so beautiful of a, there's a lot of people who talk about films that explore masculinity, and they point to things like Fight Club, and that's fair. I get that.
It's a certain type
it's
of
a certain
masculinity.
type of masculinity, but what's really beautiful about this is that I think it leans into identity and masculinity and what it is for him to be who he is, no longer able to do what he was truly born to do. You see him work with horses in this film. He was born for it. He understands them in this really almost mythical way, and you can tell that this is real. And he has a friend in the film who's had a far more severe injury, and he's still allowing him to have hope and optimism even when there's none left. So it's actually just a story of what it takes to survive in your mind when your body has betrayed you.
Yeah.
It's stunning. There's a soft masculinity to this that I think for me depicts what is the alpha male far more accurately because of the strength of his character than any of these big brawling machismo kind of, like, what do I know? I'm not a man. But it's that aside, it's just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful human story. I love this film. It's on Amazon. You can rent it. It's not that much. Please, 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 please watch this. And watch out for this director, because I can't believe she was able to do this.
Yeah.
All non-actors. Just gorgeous. Please watch it.
That was on my list. That was one of the ones that was on my list.
Yeah.
Didn't get a chance to see it before we did the show, so it's still on my list. I look forward to seeing it really, really soon because that sounds amazing. My number 6 actually also is a movie that deals with identity in a different way, and one of my favorite things about it is how many different aspects and ways to identify yourself it explores. Directed by Carlos Lopez Estrada, Blind Spotting.
Yes.
Written by and starring Rafael Casal and Daveed Diggs. Daveed Diggs plays a guy who's recently, not recently, but is on his last week of parole at a halfway house, essentially trying to transition back after getting out of prison. His friend, Rafael Casal, is sort of the ne'er-do-well, but they're best friends. They go back so far. It explores their relationship in a very honest way. And I like it because it's surgical. It's surgical in how it dissects race, not just in Oakland where the film is set, and not just regarding the relationship between the police and the black community, but it's also surgical in the ways it analyzes the identities that those two friends have, the fact that they are of different races, and how, as you learn more about their friendship, you learn how that informs their interaction and things that the other ones don't know about or don't understand about the other ones. I think it looks at identity from a white perspective, from a black perspective. Civic identity is a huge part of this film. Oakland, gentrification, what that means as far as losing parts of yourself that you thought would never go away, how that informs your character, how that informs your actions. I saw this in theaters and I liked it, and then at the end of the year I was revisiting a lot of different films as I tried to decide which ones I was going to put on my top 10, and I found that revisiting this one, I really, kind of knowing where the story was going, I dug into this character work so much more, and just the elegance. Daveed Diggs has a couple of scenes that, again, he should be in the conversation with every other performance this year. He has a confrontation scene near the end of the film with a police officer. He witnesses a police shooting and has a confrontation scene near the end of the film that is just incredible. But there's also a scene between Rafael Casal and Daveed Diggs that digs at, it is just these two friends finally hitting each other's raw nerve, and Daveed Diggs exposing things that have gone on between them for decades that have gone unspoken, that I think is just a stunning piece of acting on on Rafael Casal and Daveed Diggs' part. Blind Spotting, great movie, great character work, great payoff to these characters, and a movie that I really liked.
So Blind Spotting was pretty high up on my top 10, actually, and then Dan and I did our negotiation, and so I agree. This is really, really, really one of the best movies of the year. And though it's gotten some consideration, it hasn't gotten nearly as much as it's deserved,
No.
nor for as many categories. And it's certainly, unfortunately, not really in the conversation, probably around Oscar.
No, it's a summer. It came out in the
It's a
summer.
summer movie. It's an indie movie that I think doesn't have, and if for an indie movie like that, that is released in the summer, in order for it to get any traction around Oscar, has to have a big name attached. It has to have someone in the cast. Willem Dafoe, we saw that with the Florida Project.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, this is getting lost. And I will say, I agree with you. It is so brilliantly constructed because it's taking a very meta circumstance in our culture and locating it in between a very, very loving, tightly bonded relationship in which though two people come from the same place and in the perspective of one of them have had the same experience and for a while in the perspective of both of them have had their same experience.
Right.
I think what it does really beautifully for the audience is illustrate that though you think that that is the same experience, fundamentally, because of our culture, because of our societal constraints, because of embedded bias, it is never the same experience and it is never the same result, and one will always pay a different price than the other until everything changes, which will take, obviously, I don't know, a millennia, hopefully tomorrow. But it's a beautiful, 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 beautiful film. Couldn't agree with you more. My number 5 is a film called Cold War. And it is directed by, and forgive me, okay, I'm going to try, Paweł Pawlikowski. It is a Polish film. It is currently submitted as the Polish film for the Academy Awards for foreign film. It's won a number of awards. It's certainly been in the conversation. It's a film that is loosely based on the director's parents' lives. It's set in the Cold War from the 1940s through the 1960s in Poland and France. It follows two lovers named Tomas and Joanna. And I don't know if you've ever seen the film The War of the Roses.
I have.
Okay, so this is not that.
Okay.
But it is what it is about the toxic nature of a relationship, even if you're completely in love with the other person. And some of it has to do with world circumstances, and some of it has to do with stubbornness, and some of it has to do with your own identity and fear and insecurity. And all of this is played in the backdrop of one, being an artist, because both of them are, and two, the Cold War, so that the physical barriers between them in some cases, meaning like literally getting from one side of their performing troupe and they're traveling, and one of them wants to defect, and the other one is too scared, and so then there's a physical barrier between them that is both of political system, but also walls, actual walls, and it is the way that we build each other up and destroy each other. Because of our own fear and powerlessness and desire for a sense of empowerment in our own lives. It is shot in black and white. It is beautifully shot. It has some of the most haunting music I've heard of this year. 2 stunning performances, incredibly effective. And it's not overplaying the metaphor about the Cold War. It's really about this relationship, and it's very, very human and very, very tragic in that way. I recommend Cold War highly.
Still on my list.
Yeah, you got to see
Add
it.
to the list. Got to see it. My number 5, I won't go as much into because it's our first overlap. I have it a little higher than you did, is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I love this movie. There were some great superhero movies that came out this year. Black Panther and Avengers Infinity War obviously leading the way from Marvel. Aquaman was a $1 billion hit. Ant-Man and the Wasp came out. Deadpool 2. Like there was a lot of superhero content out there, and it would have been very easy for Spider-Man to be at the end of the year and to feel like an also ran. You know, it's we already have another Spider-Man out there. Venom had come out also, so we've been into the Spider-Verse already a couple times this year. Such a refreshing movie. I love that it sounds cliche to go into the what makes a hero storyline, but they were able to open up the universe, and it's not because you could have Spider-Man telling Spider-Man what makes someone Spider-Man, but to explore the differences between the different forms of the character and the different worlds that they inhabit, I thought was a really refreshing way. Stunning visual film, stunning. I mean, I know a lot of people said that the animation looked cheap. I couldn't disagree more. I thought that the animation looked incredible. I think it was a stylistic decision that it was perhaps more line based and maybe not as smooth frame rate wise as a Pixar film.
A decision.
There are people that think it looks cheap. I disagree 100%. And beyond just the look of it, I thought it told a great story. It was my favorite superhero film of the year, and obviously, since it's on my list, one of my favorite films of the year. I think it deserves to win the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. Again, with the caveat that I have not seen Mirai either. Maybe that'll come in and sweep me off my feet. But of the ones that I've seen, and obviously of the English language ones, this is by far my favorite.
So I agree with you, obviously. If Beale Street Could Talk is my number 4. This is a romantic drama written and directed and written by Barry Jenkins, who did Moonlight last year, which won the Academy Award. It is based on the novel of the same name. It stars Kiki Lane, Stephen James, which I don't know if you saw Homecoming, but he was great in that too. And Regina King, obviously, who's getting a lot of heat for her performance, rightfully so, in this film. This movie. Okay. The basic plot is it follows a young woman who, with the support of her family, is trying to clear the name of her lover. Again, with lover. Her partner, who has been wrongly accused, and she's pregnant with their first child. That's the basic premise. Mm-hmm. It's structured in such a way that you meet them at different points in the evolution of their romance and their time together, and you don't really know what he's been accused of at first, and you get this. Obviously, he's not guilty, but you don't. When you get to the point where you understand what he's been accused of and who is accusing him, I think is a very complicated moment in the film, because it is the structures, the power structures that be the police, and one police officer in particular, who have framed him, frankly, out of spite and out of ease of being able to do so. But the accuser, meaning the victim, it's not. It's far more complicated than that, and I think that makes the story far more complicated. She has suffered a horrible, horrible event in her life, and is as such just unreachable. And this other person's life and these other lives are going to be destroyed as a result of this one event and the petty nature of one really rotten cop. But more than that, and what's amazing to me, is that it's able to tell that story and really hit on sort of how easy it is for people to go to jail for long periods of time for something that they didn't do, just because the judicial system is set up improperly and it doesn't function well, and justice doesn't always prevail, and it frequently does not, particularly for certain segments of the population, and that is just a fact. But what's amazing to me is that he's able to tell this love story that is so lyrical and gorgeous, just in the way it's shot, but also in these performances. You fall in love with these characters. You fall in love with their story. You want happiness for them. He basically uses the framework of a real epic romance where you're really, really, really involved and you want them to end up together, and you're so invested, against this cultural historical drama. And it just it elevates the level of tragedy, it elevates the investment that you feel in the characters, and the heartbreak that they're separated unjustly, because what they have is so rare and so beautiful. So I just can't recommend this movie enough. Barry Jenkins, and If Beale Street Could Talk, it's largely around Regina King's performance this year, but even just the cinematography alone, so many other elements of this film deserve some attention. I really loved it.
And as a Florida State alumnus, I'm happy to see Barry Jenkins making great movies, because he's one of the Florida State film school graduates. I didn't get into film school; he did, rightfully so. That's the difference, kids. Barry Jenkins is making Oscar movies, and I'm here talking about it.
Well,
but more than anything, it's great to see him continue to make great films. That was another one that I was thinking about for my top 10 that you felt very strongly about. So another one of our sort of negotiating movies that could easily have been on mine too. Yeah. I loved If Beale Street Could Talk. My number 4 is a movie that sometimes a movie comes in and just kicks the door open and is such a breath of fresh air and is completely unapologetic and just feels like just this crazy creative vision executed to its fullest. And that for me was Boots Riley's Sorry to Bother You. I had to watch, this is another one. I had to watch this twice before I could really figure out, make heads or tails of it and figure out what I thought. And on second watching, I decided that I love this movie. When I was discussing Blind Spotting, I talked about how in its analysis of different issues, it was very surgical. It was a scalpel. It picked these things apart. Sorry to Bother You is a shotgun. It is a shotgun of tearing the different systems in this country apart. Race, economics, art, morality, capitalism, exploitation of labor, war, the military-industrial complex, you name it. Sorry to Bother You is out there, and it has something to say. It just feels like it just flowed right out of Boots Riley and onto the screen. Yeah. I love that it goes where it goes, and it does not apologize to anybody for what it is. I think that it is not just in volume of critique, but in the different ways that it does it. There is a scene, and I've referenced this on some other shows before. There's a scene where Lakeith Stanfield's character is asked to rap at his boss's Christmas party. And it is the most brilliant. I can't think of. First of all, it's so uncomfortable.
It's so uncomfortable.
But where it ultimately goes is one of the most perfect pieces of just true. If you want to know what satire is, watch where that scene goes, because it does satire in a way that is able to simultaneously satirize and expose artists and art, audience and performer.
It eviscerates the audience.
It does. But in its own way, it eviscerates the performer as well, because it's saying like, yes, you're eating this up, but on the other hand, you are delivering this thing that is asked of you. Yeah. When maybe you shouldn't be doing that. Maybe you need to make them uncomfortable. Maybe you shouldn't give them what they want. Yeah. It is such just a brilliant piece of critique, social critique. And that's just one moment in the film. The film has so many of them. This thing goes off the effing rails by the end of it. It is insanity, but it was just so fresh and unique and original, and I love this movie.
I love it too. This was also another one that was really, really high on my list. And then we did our negotiation. So here we are talking about it, rightfully so. If you haven't seen Sorry to Bother, look, it's not for everyone. That's the truth. No. It is wild. There's 2 or 3 moments that you have to just buy into. You got to go with it
or turn it off.
Yeah. If you're not in these moments, turn it off and get out, because you're just not going to be into this movie.
Yeah.
But that scene is one of my favorite moments in cinema this year, because it absolutely is eviscerating us, audiences, viewers. Absolutely. It's brilliantly done. And I think in a way that, to your point, is very much in his tone, which feels kinetic and out of control to some degree. It is not sort of like strictly structured, but it's stunning. I love that movie. So my number 3 is Roma, which you talked about a little bit. This is written and directed by Alfonso Cuarón. He produced it. He co-edited it. He shot some of this movie, which is amazing, because this has some of the most beautiful cinematography that we're going to see on screens. And I hope, it was available on the big screens. It's also available on Netflix. This is one of Netflix's big play for the Academy Awards. It's set in 1970 and 1971. It's supposedly semi-autobiographical about his upbringing in Mexico City. It's about a housekeeper in a middle-class family that is facing the dissolution of the marriage of the parents, and how the mother is dealing with that. But it's told from the perspective of this housekeeper named Cleo, who is played by Yalitza Aparicio, and forgive me if I've mispronounced that, because I truly tried. And this is told in the perspective, this is what's amazing about this film. It's told in the perspective of a character, and I don't think this is overplayed. It's just how it is. A perspective of a character that we often would not think to tell a film, or filmmakers have not to date, thought to tell a film from the perspective of she's female, she's indigenous, she is a housekeeper, and she is fully the protagonist. And then what it does is that it sets these cultural events that are happening in Mexico as the backdrop of the story, but it's a very, very tightly contained personal story about this family. And I think that what's so brilliant about this filmmaking and the storytelling, aside from all of the things that you just can't deny, it's beautiful. It is incredibly well acted. It is resonant in all of the ways that you sound appropriately. All of the ways that it should be utilizing the tools of the cinema are there. But on top of that, I had a conversation with someone the other day that we know that talked about, I just didn't know a lot of the history of Mexico at that time. And so I wasn't aware really of what was happening, unfortunately. And so you want to go back and look it up later. Well, that's a good thing. But the point that he's making, and I think especially by telling it from Cleo's perspective, who by halfway through the movie, I hope you're in love with Cleo. I know I was. I think that I love this character, and she's really stayed with me for a long time since I've seen this film, is that the point that it's making is that what's happening in these grander machinations and these big political plays aren't the point. The point is how it's impacting everyday people who have nothing to do with it. Who have maybe even not a ton of awareness themselves about it, but it's directly impacting and in some ways demolishing their lives, not so much in this film. That's one thing that I thought was beautiful. Another thing that's super soft and underplayed is that one of the younger kids in the family, who she clearly loves and adores, references past lives 2 or 3 different times and his memory of past lives. And I've heard stories of little kids kind of having memories of past lives, but I think that he does that and he brings this in. Maybe it was a part of his life, I don't know. But the point that it underscores is the connective tissue between human beings, whether you are in a grand position of power, whether you are a housekeeper, whether you are in the army. All of that means you could be all of those things, and we're interwoven at once. I love this film. I really love Roma, and I think it deserves all of the attention it's getting. Daniel, number 3.
Yeah, I agree. I think it deserves the attention that it's getting, even though, like I said, it didn't connect to me in the way that it connected to many others. I cannot deny the passion with which it was made, and as far as cinematography, direction, and all that stuff, it deserves everything that it's being recognized for, and performance-wise as well. My number 3 was the theatrical experience of the year for me. In a year with so many great documentaries, this was my favorite of all of them. Free Solo. It tells the story of climber Alex Honnold, and he's attempting to become the first person to free solo El Capitan. What does that mean? It basically means he's going to scale El Capitan, no gear, no safety ropes, nothing. It's just him versus the mountain. And what I love is that it's not just Alex versus El Capitan. It's Alex versus El Capitan versus himself. Ultimately, his own life, his own path that's taken him to this point, his own insecurities, his own experience. I think he's a really compelling character. I love when, documentary, I feel like you can choose a subject matter, but so many times just fate and luck and perseverance and tenacity pay off as far as watching somebody grow, actual real growth throughout a film. And the months that this film follows him, you see him grow as a person. You see his life change. You see him go from being this guy who lives alone in a van to dealing with what he does for a living now with someone who cares for him, which he'd never had before, or certainly not to the extent that he does in this film. So I think he's a fascinating subject. On top of that, you have this palm sweating, just daredevil feat that he's attempting, which takes up, the last third of the movie or so. That is just, we talk about a genre bias as far as nominations in Best Picture and acting, etc. Jimmy Chin and Elizabeth Chai Vasarhelyi directed this film. And then Jimmy Chin also was working in the cinematography. This film should be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Cinematography. I don't know why it should be limited to a narrative feature, because the way that they shoot this, and you even see...
They have to climb.
You see in the film itself, the way the camera setups that they have to make, the fact that they have to balance... if you get too close to this guy, he will die. If you distract him, he will die. And
that's their friend. friend.
It is, and they get to know him. You have to document
No, they were already
this
friends.
thing. Okay, well, so they know each other. But you have to document this event, and if you interfere with it, not only do you spoil the event, you could kill your subject.
Yeah.
And this is an incredible film. Again, it did pretty well for a documentary. But I also think that, again, this should be you should do a double feature, Annihilation and Free Solo. The scale and the scope of this, as far as a theatrical experience, this was unforgettable. It's a weird day. It was unforgettable for me to watch. And it's my number 3 film of the year. I love this movie. I end every one of these movies I end with I love this movie, which makes sense because they're on my top 10 list, so I guess I should love them.
You should, and you should love this movie. I love this movie too for all of the reasons you illuminated. Yeah. It's bananas.
It's crazy
that they shot it that way.
Yeah.
For all of those reasons. So my number 2 movie is The Guilty. So this is a Danish thriller, co-written and directed by Gustav Müller. It is the Danish entry for Best Foreign Language Film at the Academy Awards. This is such a contained film. I've never really seen anything like this. They're actually remaking it right now with Jake Gyllenhaal, but whatever.
Oh, okay.
Well, I don't think it needs remaking, frankly, because this centers on one performance by an actor named Jacob Sedergren, who plays Asger Holm, who is a police officer, and he's assigned to the dispatch alarm. They call it alarm dispatch. It's basically 911. And he gets a call from a woman who has been kidnapped. And the film unfolds in real time as he tries to figure out where she is, who's kidnapped her, why she's been kidnapped, and to get her retrieved in time before she's killed. So it is really tense, but it all takes place within the dispatch room. So there are other characters in the film, but it's largely just him talking to people on the phone, and very briefly with people in the film, but it's all contained from his perspective over real time in that one room. And so in that sense, the word cinematic is interesting, right? Because you can't call that cinematic in the sense that it's not this grand film, and it's sort of not epic in scope in terms of what it's depicting on screen. However, it's in a sense pure storytelling because it's all happening in your mind. So when really genuinely horrific events are talked about and revealed, and you learn about them as he does, and you sort of figure out what's happened as he does, it's all playing out in your own mind. It is a family. And the other thing is, he's a police officer who has been assigned to dispatch because he has done something. That's not normally where he would be. It is thrilling. It is a drama. It is heartbreaking. It is stunningly told and very contained storytelling. The fact that they pull it off in one room is always a feat to me because it's really not something that often does work in a film.
Yeah.
I can't recommend this movie enough. It's brilliant. Watch it, The Guilty.
My number 2 is from writer-director Lynn Ramsey, who has made, I wouldn't call them uplifting films, but I think masterfully crafted films, and this was a masterfully crafted film in every sense of the word. Came out earlier in the year, called You Were Never Really Here, starring Joaquin Phoenix, who, again, if this were a performance that came out late in the year, I think would be in the conversation for awards talk. This is another one that is not the feel-good movie of the year. I feel like a lot of the movies I picked are downers. That's not always the case, but this is, I think that Lynn Ramsey is a master of the craft. She knows how to use every aspect of storytelling, the camera, obviously directing her actors, but also down to the sound design. The sound design on this film I thought was incredible. And I know that seems ticky-tacky, but it's the kind of thing that you don't notice if it's done well, but it's almost kind of a bell curve because if it's done extraordinarily well, I think you do notice.
Yeah.
And the sound design on this was something that I think was perfect. It is, Joaquin Phoenix plays, for lack of a better term, a fixer. He's the guy that you call when you need something taken care of, or more accurately, usually someone taken care of. But where I think the brilliance in this film lies is that it is very much about violence, but it's not about the violence itself. It's about what violence does to you. What is the effect of violence on you as a person? And the choice that's made throughout this film that I think really underscores that is that you very rarely see an act of violence occur on screen in this film. More often, and there are several points where this is the case, you see the aftermath of it. You see the effect of it. You don't see the act itself. You see the person afterwards that has done it, that is the perpetrator of it. Sometimes it's Joaquin Phoenix, sometimes it's someone else. Sometimes it's somebody that has done it to somebody else, and you see the effect on the person who loves that person. I think that is so much more powerful than if this had been, Revenge is a very violence-driven movie. You see every drop of blood. You hear every rip of flesh. It relishes in that violence because that's what that movie is. Yeah. That's the catharsis of that movie, is seeing those acts of violence, because you hate these characters so much. You want to see them suffer.
Yeah.
You don't want to see the characters in this film suffer. And I think Lynn Ramsey is so smart in understanding that, and understanding that the story of this film is about what this life has done to Joaquin Phoenix in particular, what it's turned him into, and how it continues to push him. That this was very, I think, deep and profound. And, it seems like sort of a high concept idea of just like a hitman on the loose, but it is very personal.
Yeah.
And Lynn Ramsey, I think, she works small. She did a very disturbing movie called We Need to Talk About Kevin, that I think was a very, very, very good movie. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I hope that she gets more credit as she continues throughout her career. But this was a really, really good film, a film that I revisited and enjoyed again even more on the second watch, which I think is the telltale sign of a great movie. Mm-hmm. And I highly, highly recommend it. But again, not the feel-good movie of the year.
Not. It definitely isn't. This is a movie I think that we reviewed earlier in the year.
Pretty early on, yeah.
And this was also one that was edging and to be on my list. I think We Need to Talk About Kevin is one of my favorite films, I think, period. And I love Lynn Ramsey as a director. This is one of my favorites of this year. Unbelievable performance by Joaquin Phoenix, but also very, very well directed. Now, number one, we can just open up to discussion because we share number one.
We share the same number one. We did not plan this.
We didn't plan this. This is just how the cookies crumbled this year. But I will say this. We're going to briefly talk about number one now. But I probably, and we may leave a link in the description.
It's a whole hour of us talking about this movie.
There's a whole hour of us talking about this movie in another video. So if you're curious, all of our thoughts about this particular movie can be found there, and I think we will put it in the link to the description, because why not? This is a movie that was written and directed by Ari Aster in a feature debut, which is pretty impressive.
Yes.
It stars the number one most snubbed should-be Oscar contender of the year, Toni Collette, #Oscar for Tony.
Yes.
In one of the, if not the, I think, best performances, definitely one of them, of the year. It also stars Alex Wolff, Millie Shapiro, and Gabriel Byrne in equally well-crafted performances. This is a family this is a family drama.
Talking about Hereditary, by the way.
Exactly. Well,
yes.
Exactly. This is about how we inherit, literally and figuratively, the demons of those that came before. This is a generational haunting that I think beautifully crafts a metaphor for how our parents damn us with their damage, and we carry it forward. And the only way out is, I won't say what it is, but that it's a metaphor, and it's actually happening as a horror film at once, which I think is very hard to do, and it is stunningly crafted. Every single move, and the use of a dollhouse, and the way that we are small beings at the mercy of those powers above us, whether they be the demons that drive us, whether they be our parents, or whether they be gods and demons. We are nothing but pawns at their mercy. Dan, weigh in, and then I will say we have an hour of this. I think it's a good video.
Yeah.
You should watch it.
This is an A24 film. I'm very kind of take it or leave it on a lot of A24 movies, and that's sort of how I walked into Hereditary. I did not really love It Comes at Night, which was kind of a similar in style movie and sold very similarly the year before. Yeah. And I was really just kind of mixed on that film. And I walked into Hereditary not really knowing what to expect. This movie engaged me more than any movie I saw in 2018. I thought and continue to think about this movie, and that's what excites me, and that's what puts it up at number one for me. Is it's not just a good movie. It is provocative. It has so many things to unwrap and mysteries to solve and puzzles to put together. in a literal sense. And that's the other thing. It works brilliantly as a metaphor. It also works brilliantly as a literal tale of horror and sorrow and sadness. And Ann Dowd is another cast member who plays a character that just introduces this element of evil.
Yeah.
It works as a drama. It works as a horror movie. It works across so many different lines, and I watched it for we got to a screening. I was lucky to see it. We were going to do our spoiler review. I went and saw it again to take notes. I watched it again last week as I was sorting out, is this really my number one movie of the year?
Hail Paimon, Dan.
Hail Paimon. I was as engaged watching this last week the third time as I was the first time I saw it in a theater, maybe more so because I still find stuff in it. In this third viewing, I found stuff in it, and I bet in the fourth and fifth and sixth viewing, I'm still going to find stuff in this movie that I love. Very divisive film.
Yes.
Not the general audience was not on board with this film necessarily. A lot of critics were as well. What separates a movie from being good and enjoyable, or even great and enjoyable, to being something that I would call my favorite movie of the year is the amount of engagement that I have and the amount that it sucks me in. And every element of this film, for me, is done absolutely perfectly.
Yeah, I agree.
And there are so few films, even great ones, that I can say every element of this film was done perfectly. To me, Hereditary, every element of this film, technically, from a storytelling standpoint, from an acting standpoint, is done perfectly. And that's why it's my favorite movie of the year.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's crafted in such a way, the execution is so clear. Everything is done with intent. Every choice is done with intent from every person involved. That means every performance, every decision the director makes.
Production design,
where the camera sits,
sound design,
how it moves, everything.
Yeah.
I think this is a masterclass in the craftsmanship of filmmaking. But more than that, to me, it leaves a deeply resonant emotional impact as well. So you guys let us know what your favorite movies of the year are in the comments below. I'm going to say this, every single one of the movies that I picked, you can find. You can watch it on Amazon or Hulu right now, if not in theaters. Some of my honorable mentions actually might be a little bit harder to come across, like Shoplifters, which was just in theaters, so it isn't available yet on streaming. But watch the movies. Let us know what you think.
Movies have never been easier to find than they are now, if you have the means and if you have the services and if you're able to track down and find them. And again, we never say that these are going to be movies for you, but they sure as hell were for us. And let's hope in 2019 that we can find a slate that's just as inventive and engaging as this group of
Agreed.
films.
And I hope that the thing that I just said is true. The obscure ones I know you can watch, but maybe I actually don't know if Into the Spider-Verse is still everywhere. Okay, we'll find out. We'll see. In any event, those are our favorite movies of the year. Let us know yours, and we look forward to further discussion in 2019.
Absolutely. Thanks for watching.